Hello, this is Kris Nelson from evolveconsciousness.org. I'll be presenting a new presentation on causality as it relates to consciousness and existence. This is a reformulation of some of my previous work that I've put into a new infographic presentation with some additional information. And I have several parts to this presentation. I'll be explaining some parts of causality itself after I explain aspects of consciousness in relation to causality. And I also have other work on truth and speaking truth and other aspects about truth. And I also have another final presentation that will deal with symbolism, the four elements, going back to Egypt, and the origin of our language and alphabet. That one is the big work. I was trying to do everything all together and have a big presentation, but I realized that would take me a longer time to do, and I wouldn't be able to put out the stuff that's already done. And if I would put it out in such a big format, it would be too large for people to get through. So here's the first part on causality. There's a bunch of infographics, and I'll be including some old ones I've done just for a refresher to show where my work has taken me. And also, after I've done the causality one, there'll be one on truth. And then after that, there'll be the one on living according to the four elements and the symbolism from that and the symbolism from Egypt. So I still have more work to do in that last presentation, but at least I can get some initial work that I've done. This has been done pretty much since January, but I've been working on the other project, or on the whole project as a whole. So I still have to finish that final part, which has a lot of research and more stuff to make into infographics. But at least this part is pretty much done, so I'm going to do the parts that are done, and then I'll keep working on the parts that need to get done, and at least it'll be a steady progression of work coming out. So anyways, here we have the first image. So we have the sky and the earth. We have the sky, which is the air in the sky, and that's above and that's higher. Then we have the earth and the ground, and that's below and lower. And in the sky you have the sun, and that produces heat. On the ground it produces light. So in the sky and in the air and in above and higher is related to the sun and the light and the heat and being alive. Even though the sky can be dark at night, and you can have the sky as symbolism of dark, but it's primarily symbolism of light, because in the sky is where you have the stars and the sun. That's where the air is above, the sky is above, and it's higher. And the earth is below, it's lower, to the ground. And there it is dark, because the light does not reach below the earth. It's dark in the earth, it's cold in the earth, and it's, quote, dead, where you have people who are alive towards truth and morality, and you have people who are dead towards truth and morality. That's the symbolism we're going to play off of, or that I'm going to play off of and demonstrate to you. So this relates to the presentation that I'm still working on the symbolism of the four elements and the sun rising, and how we can look at reality in order to recognize what is in reality and then mimic a language based on that reflection of truth in reality. So this is how reality is set up. And also the four elements work in the same way, but I'll get to that later. This is related to the four elements work, it's just I've separated it as part of the consciousness and causality. Otherwise, putting everything together is just too much. So I could have added those two infographics on the sun rising and setting and the underworld and the four elements and fire, air, water, and earth. But you'll have to wait for later for that symbolism, as it's more related to the other presentation. Even though it fits into this one, it's just not as pertinent, so I didn't include it. So that's just the basic symbolism. In image 2, we see this expounded upon and developed. So there's the air and the sky, and that's quote heaven and quote the afterlife. So something important to remember is this aspect of heaven and afterlife symbolism, because it's symbolism, it's not literal places, okay? It's symbolism, both within ourselves and within the earth. Because we can create first the heaven internally, and then we can project that externally in our actions to create a heaven on earth. But we don't co-create alone, we co-create in the aggregate, collectively together. So although you can create a heaven and an afterlife internally, it takes everyone together to create that externally. And that's where we have a lot of work to do, is in the external manifestation of heaven, afterlife, the salvation, Elysium. And that's done through the concepts of Ma'at, Isis, the right hand of God, and order. And when we do that, well, we're alive. We have life. We're in the light. We have the sight and vision. Because the light, the sun, and the stars represent truth. And when you grasp truth and when you attain greater degrees of truth, well, you're more alive than you were before when you were dead in the ground. You have life. You have afterlife. You have the eternal life in greater degrees. You have the light of truth rather than the darkness and ignorance of falsity and untruth. You have the sight and vision. You can finally see with the light, because when you're in the dark you can't see. So again, the air and the sky, heaven, all that is above. It's high in the sky. And that requires a higher consciousness in order to attain it. And this is also representative of the symbolism of God, which is just the good generator. And that's, quote, the ruler of sky or of heaven. And we go to earth and the ground. That's hell and the underworld compared to heaven and the afterlife. You have hell and the underworld. That's perdition and Tartarus, represented through the concepts of Isfet, Eris, the left hand of God, and chaos. And when you're in the ground, well, you're, quote, dead in death, dark and blind. You're not alive, you're still dead. You don't have the true life, the higher life. You're death, dead in the tomb, in the coffin, in the grave, in the ground, where there's no light. From the previous image, the light and the heat does not reach you because you're in the ground, you're in the tomb, in the coffin, in the grave. So you need that light in order to wake up, the initial first catalyst of awakening, the initial care for truth in order to begin the, quote, spiritual journey, the knowledge quest, on the path and way towards greater attainment of truth and morality and care for other beings. So just as the sky was above and high in the sky, well, the earth and the ground is below, and it's low to the ground. So you have high in the sky and you have low to the ground. And of course there's dual symbolism where you could be floating in the sky and not grounded in the ground. And that's another symbolic aspect of the air and the earth, where you need to be grounded in the earth in order to get higher up. So I'm not talking about that symbolism here. It's another aspect of symbolism. So in the ground, below, low to the ground is lower consciousness. This is symbolism. Low to the ground, high in the sky. And in the sky is God, which is the good generator. And in the ground, below, in hell and the underworld, that's the, quote, devil, the evil generator. So God is simply symbolism for generator of good, and devil is symbolism for generator of evil. There's not literal devil, there's not literal God, there's not things that you can actually touch. It's not a thing in itself, it's conceptual symbolism to try to make sense of reality, which is what all symbolism is for. So much as the God is the ruler of sky and heaven, the devil is the ruler of earth and hell. So when you're in the ground, in the earth and the ground, you're dead in death, darkness, and blindness. Well, this is where most of the masses are. This is where most of the population on earth is. The masses are blind, ignorant fools creating a hell on earth. So that's what we have right now, is a hell on earth. It might be hard to understand this symbolism and how it's actually a hell on earth, and the power we have is to create a heaven on earth or a hell on earth. This is what all the ancient symbolism is about, which I'm going to get into in that last part of my presentation that I'm working on now. And it's all symbolism. There's multiple aspects to it. There's the hell in the underworld we have to traverse as the hero monomyth in order to come back to the world we left behind as a changed, a self-transformative process to fix the world. But there's also, apart from that symbolism of internally going into the hell and the underworld and the darkness and the shadow and the demon and facing that in ourselves, there's also the manifested aspect of it existing on earth, where we've created a hell on earth because we live in such low consciousness that then is reflected outwards into how we live our lives on earth. And that's how we have gotten to the position we are in. And the only way you're going to correct the hell on earth and create a heaven on earth is to go into the hell and the underworld within ourselves and to correct the darkness, the demon, the negative, the shadow, the evil, the wrong, the immorality from ourselves that we're creating into the world. And then when everyone does that, when everyone heals themselves and brings themselves to an internal heaven and internal afterlife, then we will have the external heaven and the external afterlife. So image 3 is just another representation in terms of heaven and hell. Here I'm using an old, it's a painting by some guy called Heaven and Hell, but I put a little bit of blur on it just to show just a little artsy aspect of heaven above and the blue in the sky, and then below is the red and the chaos and the evil. So I just put it in as colorful symbolism rather than the more bland backgrounds that I've created myself. These ones are just to show the heaven and hell as represented in artwork. And in image 3b, you can see the previous infographic I've made that does use this artwork, this heaven and hell painting. So this is Truth, Natural Law, Heaven and Hell Bible Symbolism that just describes a lot of the Bible symbolism in terms of evolving consciousness and ladders, degrees, steps, grades, levels, stages, births, and awakenings in order to evolve consciousness from heaven to hell, from earth to air, from dead and death to being alive and with life. So this I had done almost a year ago. So I'm coming back on that work in a way and expounding upon it. So I just wanted to add that correspondence between the air and the sky and the earth and the ground above and below. And in the image 3, the nicer artwork, just to show visually in a blue and red aspect. And also in 3b that I've used this painting before in some work last year, which itself is dealing with a lot of the information, with some of the information in this presentation, as well as information in the presentations that I'm working on in conjunction to this. So I won't go into it. There's a presentation already on it. in audio and video on YouTube or on my site. You can download the audio or watch the video, and it goes into the whole infographic and explains it. I think it's over an hour. So go please look into that if you want more information on this image 3B. So now we have image 4. So again, carrying with the same higher and lower symbolism. Now I'm using white and black just to show checkerboard floor aspects, which I have an infographic as well, just a little image of that, which is what the previous infographic 3B on heaven and hell was dealing with in the Bible symbolism, was on a ladder in grades and levels in order to get off the checkerboard flow of low base, animistic, beastly, carnal, fleshly consciousness in the pleasure trap and the pleasure principle, and evolving towards a higher ego, a higher self, higher consciousness, a higher soul. Because all those things are the same thing. Consciousness, self, soul, ego, pretty much the same thing. You just have to understand how they're the same thing. So right now in a lot of the spiritual, so-called spiritual, pseudo-spiritual information, people try to make the ego the enemy. Sure it is. We are our own worst enemies. Consciousness is a double-edged sword, which is the self, which is the soul, which is the ego. The ego has dual aspects. Consciousness has dual aspects. Self has dual aspects. Soul has dual aspects. It's the same thing. There's just different terminology to talk about ourselves in different ways. And a lot of them are pseudo-spiritual, woo-woo. They try to put it outside of you. Oh, you got a soul somewhere and la-di-da-di-da-di. No, it's all you. It's all you. It's all inside of you. It's all you right here, right now. It's nothing that needs to be externalized in some other force. That's taking the power away from you. All the power is within you. I've explained that in previous etymological breakdowns, I think, on symbolism and reality and attachment, I think, and grounding in reality, or some audio presentations or some reading of some articles I've done on maybe tracing reality. I forget which ones, but I've talked about, I think it was words reality and proportions. It might be that one, where I've talked into the symbolism of consciousness and how we're fooling ourselves with these invented conceptions. Anyways, enough about that. So image number 4, we have air, or quote heaven, quote the afterlife, salvation, Elysium, Ma'at, Isis, the right hand of God, order. That's alive, life, light, sight, and vision. This is higher consciousness, the quote spiritual higher self, the true self. As I've been mentioning in my other work, it's not some higher thing somewhere else, it's not some true thing somewhere else. It's all aspects of ourselves in a dualistic capacity to align with the dualistic poles of truth or falsity, of morality or immorality. And if you align with one, you embody, actualize, individuate, and realize yourself as a more fuller representation in alignment with truth, as opposed to an alignment with falsity, which makes you a false self, more of a false self. And when you align more with truth and you let go of the falsity, you become more of a true self. But these are infinite conceptions. True self is infinite, higher self is infinite. There is no point of saturation, because these deal with projections or personifications into ourselves from concepts that we derive, such as something that's higher, something that's true, as opposed to something that's lower, something that's false. Well, then we attribute ourselves to that, to the truth, and we make ourselves the truth. So, oh, now the true self is something outside of us. The higher self is something outside of us, which is what I used to think in terms of a force or, spirit or quote soul or quote spirit, whatever. But it's all externalization of our power based on influence from other people, using words of influence in order to convince us of certain models of understanding reality. But I have since recreated my model in a way that doesn't require any wishful thinking or imagination that's not grounded in reality. You don't need any pure fantasy imagination of believing whatever you want to externalize things outside of you because you can't make sense of them internally and how they are you. So self, consciousness, soul, ego, it's all us. Most people need to understand this. I'm going to try to explain it. It relates to identity and trying to understand ourselves and trying to provide answers to questions we might not have answers to, and believing things that we shouldn't believe simply because they give us an answer for something. Anyways, to continue. So, higher consciousness, quote, spiritual, higher self, true self, the service to truth and morality as an evolved, transformed, and, quote, of the spirit. And so this is where we're climbing the ladder. As opposed to that, when you're not climbing the ladder, you're just living, as I've detailed in my previous work on truth, natural law, heaven and hell, Bible symbolism. Well, when you're in animalistic, low-base, carnal, fleshly, beastly consciousness, well, you're on the checkerboard floor, and the checkerboard floor is good and evil, black and white. You're living amorally as an animal. You're not focusing on service to truth and morality. You don't have an objective understanding of reality in that capacity. So you end up walking in duality. You're doing both good and evil. When you climb off of that board, you're no longer stuck in the confusion of evil as good and good as evil. Now you have clarity of understanding, and you're working towards more alignment of truth and morality and casting off the falsity that has you creating evil instead of good. So, this is the darkness of earth, hell, underworld, perdition, Tartarus, Isfet, Eris, the left hand of God, chaos, dead, death, dark, blind. This is lower consciousness, physical lower self, as opposed to the quote spiritual higher self, the true self. It's the physical lower self as a false self. And this is where we have service to self and pleasure and comfort, where we're not concerned about truth and morality. So whatever is true for us, whatever is good for us, not objectively but subjectively, well, that's what we do. Because it's all about service to ourselves, to pleasure and our comfort. And this is 99.999% of the world. So this is carnal, beastly, and quote, of the flesh, rather than being of the spirit, in terms of symbolism in the Bible. Of the spirit is this higher consciousness, and of the flesh is this lower consciousness, where it's a physical lower self because you're attached to your body and the pleasure and the comfort you derive. That's why it's an amoral, animalistic, carnal, beastly, fleshly, low-base consciousness. Image 5 is a little different than the previous one. So I just have on the left side the same thing, except for this is where you're superior to your former self. When you're trying to evolve, you're trying to climb the ladders and go through successive grades, degrees, ascensions, elevations. From your former self, you're becoming superior to your former self. You're also along the way becoming superior to other people, as much as people want to view that as a negative aspect of ego. Get real. When you become better than other people, you're becoming superior. Just like when you become better than your former self, you're superior to your former self. So people who are more moral are superior to others who are less moral. People always want to view the word superiority in terms of, oh, well, that's validation to do whatever you want. Someone who views themselves as superior is just going to do whatever they want to anyone else. No, that's not what superior means. Superior just means you're higher. It doesn't mean, well, now we have the term superior, we can do whatever we want, we're superior. No, that's not what superior means. Superior just means higher, better. So when you talk about morality, which is the whole point of evolving consciousness, to evolve and transform, and quote, of the spirit, that's becoming superior to who we were, and it's also becoming superior to other people. And there's other people who are superior to us because we haven't done as much work as they have. So they're superior to us in certain capacities, and we can be superior to them in other capacities. And then there's other people who are, holistically as a whole, they are superior to other people. Because other people are, as a whole, inferior in terms of their alignment with morality. And that's your choice, your current condition, where you are. We're all inferior and superior to other people in varying degrees. That's just reality. But people are so trapped in New Age bullshit, and they're so trapped in, the ego has a hold on them, that they start to complain, and oh my god, you think you're superior, and then they start to complain, and people who, there's this whole thing of denying the ego. Oh, you gotta kill the ego, and death to the ego, and it's all this referring to the ego in a negative light. What about the ego in a positive light? Hardly anyone's talking about that, because people have the pseudo-spiritual conception of, oh, the ego's bad, and you gotta kill the ego, and you gotta be ego-less, and death to the ego. You know, people who think like that are the ones most trapped in the ego, because they actually think that they can kill the ego, and they might actually think that they've reached a position where they have killed the ego, and that they are ego-less. But that just lets you know, when someone thinks that they don't have an ego, that just lets you know how deeply entrenched they are in ego, and how much the ego, the negative ego, has a grasp on them, to delude them into thinking that they actually killed a part of themselves, that they killed themselves, that they killed the ego, and they think they won. But that's actually the negative ego triumphing over the positive ego to make you think that you've annihilated the ego itself, which you can't do. So anyways, on the right side of image 5, we have, this is an evolved human being, walking and living the one way and path. This is self-knowledge. This is what all self-knowledge is. I have a note on that, on how self-knowledge is moral knowledge. Because the self, that's where morality comes from, is us. It comes internally. It doesn't come from anywhere out there. That's just a projection we make onto the universe and reality. Morality comes from us. Oh, it's objective. But moral actions don't come from no humans. If there were no humans existing, would there be moral action or immoral action, and the reciprocation and the right to redress a wrong? There wouldn't be anyone engaging in morality, because there wouldn't be humans to acknowledge it. Or if there weren't other aliens or whatever you want to conceive of. If there's not the beings capable of recognizing the concept of morality and generating immorality and not immorality, then there is no morality actually coming about or being created through the willful force of consciousness. It all comes from us. This is the latest developments I've been having this past month, is it all comes from us. It's all, we need to stop externalizing our power and learn that it actually comes from within. Consciousness, self, soul, ego, that's where it comes from. It comes from us. Morality can only express itself through free will, causal agents to do so. And lower order consciousness, such as animals, well, they live in that checkerboard floor. They're amoral animals. They don't understand morality, and they do whatever based on their base biological programming, and whatever they need to survive, that's how they act, because they are amoral, lower order consciousness beings. Now, we are higher order consciousness beings, and we can still act amorally by not caring about truth and morality. We can live as lower order consciousness animals and not actualize and realize the potential we have to be a true human being. How do you get there? Well, that's self-knowledge, walking and living the one-way and path as an evolved human being. Service to truth and morality. That's where you become a higher self, where you become a truer self. This is the whole point of all my work on my site since day one. I haven't realized it all, but it's all been building up, and I've always been talking about morality and truth and bringing the truth into yourself more and more. I'm uncovering more aspects of how that's the most important symbolism that has ever been derived in all the hundreds of thousands of history of ancient civilizations or any other possibilities we have. All the knowledge of the exoteric layer of you want to believe there's aliens, you want to believe there's the gods, and you want to believe all these narratives and stories which were created in order to encode symbolism and was later perverted and bastardized and taken literally in order to confuse people even more. But if you want to believe the exoteric layer of these stories and narratives, well, you can go right ahead. But this isn't what's most important. This isn't what people have been thinking about. The most important knowledge is about truth and morality. And this is what is encoded within those stories and narratives, because this is the most pivotal information in order to create a heaven on earth. All of the other things don't matter. Alleged aliens, whether they're real or not, encounters in the past, doesn't matter. Not really. How is any of that affecting your life right now? To help you live morally or not? In truth or not? Didn't affect me. I already knew about aliens, and people keep talking about it, and what's that changing in my life? Not a damn thing. You know what will change in everyone's lives? What will help people to change in their lives is truth and morality, not knowledge on ancient technology or hidden technology or ancient aliens or modern aliens or hidden aliens or astral this or remote that or meditation in 10 different forms or any of this other stuff is not going to help you create a heaven on earth. What will help you is actual knowledge, conscious awareness to evolve consciousness in the polarity of truth and morality. That's what self-knowledge is. This is what the most encoded, esoteric, encrypted, occulted, and magical information there is. Why magical? Because this is the actual magic of how we create our reality, is this knowledge. As I've said, all the exoteric level stories and narratives are inconsequential, even if they are true, even if the Old Testament, New Testament caricature, imagery of God is true, I don't care. Even if that all talks about aliens, I don't care. Even if Sumerian gods and goddesses are real, I don't care. Even if they talk about aliens, I don't care. Even if Egypt, the gods and goddesses, which is a joke, is literal and real, which it isn't. All you have to go is look at it. Even if you take the stories and narratives as literal, which after you read them, it's just a joke and you can't take it literally. But people buy into this for millennia. They buy into bullshit stories that make them feel good about questions such as an afterlife and after death. And this manipulates people. This is what the priest and political class has always done. And they veil it under the veil of good. The authority is veiled under good. That's why you have concepts like Ma'at and Isfet for chaos. Ma'at for order and truth and balance. And then the political priest rulership class uses stories and narratives within that guise of the ruler being the hand of God and following the principles of Ma'at. And so everyone just has to do the same so that they can get into the afterlife. It's all a mind fuck. All these stories and narratives, on an exoteric level, if you believe them, you're believing in bullshit. The real information is esoterically decoded through symbolism. It's not right in your face put out. Since when have any of the priest class controllers, any of the rulers, put the supremely important information directly out there for us to learn about? Anybody? Because I can't see it anywhere in history, even in Egypt. All the information is encoded within the esoteric stories and narratives through metaphors, allegories, parables, analogies, all the symbolism to encode it. But nowhere in history have they just told us, not in the recent 6,000 years. We don't have any evidence of that. Maybe in the previous civilization it was more open for people to learn in truth and morality. But I suspect it still wasn't that open. Maybe it would have been more open than it is now, but I still suspect they didn't evolve far enough, and things went downward as well before the Ice Age, before the flood. And then that gets passed down through story narrative, through the word telephone method. It gets degraded in the telephone line experiment we've all done as children. It all gets degraded and eroded, and the message gets changed. And the underlying symbolism of the story and narrative is still there, but it gets interpreted as literal. Anyways, this is all for later work on symbolism and the four elements, and how to find truth by looking at reality, and how symbolism is supposed to reflect reality accurately. So anyways, in the dark part you have, instead of an evolved human being walking and living the one way and path of self-knowledge, you're an amoral beast walking in both good and evil as an ignorant fool. That's what the checkerboard floor actually represents. You're ignorant because you're walking as both good and evil. The checkerboard floor does not represent one square of ignorance and one square of knowledge. It can make sense that way, but so you're going through life, in the dual aspect of having knowledge and having ignorance. I guess it works that way. But in terms of self-knowledge, which has to do with truth and morality, good and evil, well, that's where you're walking both good and evil as an amoral beast. Because you wouldn't be, if all you had was ignorance and knowledge, and you weren't doing evil with your ignorance and lack of knowledge, then you wouldn't be an amoral beast doing both good and evil. So that's why the checkerboard floor really is about good and evil, and walking them both. It's not about ignorance and knowledge. The black and the white squares represent how you're walking in both good and evil, as an amoral beast, in low consciousness. And yes, the way out of it is knowledge. So yes, the ladder is knowledge, but that's the truth, and morality is the ladder upwards to higher consciousness. The whole checkerboard itself is ignorance, where you're walking the dualistic, amoral, carnal, beastly, fleshly, good and evil path, where you're just doing both, because you're amoral. You're not concerned about morality. So that's living as the animals in the animal kingdom that aren't capable of understanding morality, and they do things just to survive and just based on pleasure and basic instinctual programming. So image 6, this deals with, instead of looking at the ground as bad and the air in heaven as good, the ground is the devil in image 1 and 2. Here I'm talking about that other symbolism of how you can have the ground as a good thing, as a required thing. So this one's called the primacy of existence to evolve consciousness. Why is that? Because you need to start from the ground and work your way up to evolve. That's the same thing as the low base consciousness. To get to higher, you're on the ladder going up. Unfortunately, we start from an amoral checkerboard living of doing good and evil. So we're at a much lower position. But this infographic is about the primacy of existence and not the primacy of consciousness. The primacy of existence in order to evolve consciousness. So we need deeper roots in reality in order to have a deeper growth in consciousness. It starts from the ground. Many people have a hard time understanding this. They get lost in pseudo-spiritual conceptions and mystical, clever rhetoric, but it's a lot of bullshit. So you have to have your feet on the ground so that you can go into the stars. You're going to have your head in the clouds, but you have to have your feet on the ground. So again, this is not the same symbolism as what I've been using. although it does tie in. So, in the ground is a stronger foundation in reality, allows for more accurate abstractions in consciousness. So the more your roots grow in the ground, the more the tree can grow into the sky, into the air, into the clouds, into higher consciousness. But you'll always have a bigger root base in reality, because that's where all of accurate understanding comes from, is in reality. Because you see, you have internal consciousness, which are our thoughts and emotions. And that's why I was relating all this previous symbolism. There's the symbolism of the good and bad, yes, that all applies. But within that, that's our projections of the higher and the lower. I was giving symbolism of the ground being lower and the air being, the sky being higher. And how that relates to Ma'at, or Isfet, and order and chaos, or the right hand and the left hand, and good and evil, and truth and falsity. So there's that aspect of symbolism, but I'm talking about something else now. So remember to delineate the multiple levels, the multiple layers of symbolism that can apply in different contexts. So here we have internal consciousness, thought and emotions, the quote, spirit, the mental, the idea, which is how we get the ideal. And this is an infinite domain of thought and imagination. This is where we have abstraction and imagination, and it's subjective. It's all within us. We can subjectively imagine and abstract complete fantasies that have no grounding in reality. They're just complete poppycock fantasy. Is that the way to go? No. That's how you end up living in a make-believe world of believing whatever you want. And that's not how you evolve consciousness. So, to evolve consciousness, you need to go back to the primacy of existence, where you're going to have a stronger foundation in reality to allow for more accurate abstractions in consciousness. So this is external consciousness, it's not internal. And where we do unite, as the red and the blue join together in terms of a frequency, well, the middle is green, right? If you're going to look at it in terms of that color symbolism. I'm not saying green is the optimal to have here. I'm saying if you unite the left brain and the right brain, and you bring them into one, you're going to get green. You want to call it purple, mixing colors? You know, a color palette, mix colors, you get purple. Fine. I've shown that in other parts of my work. In the Philosopher's Stone, Natural Law, Boundary Conditions, and the Spectrum of Living. But here we want to talk about green. Well, when you join the red and the blue, the left and the right, you're going to produce a green in terms of a low frequency and a high frequency. The green frequency is in the middle. All I'm talking about is balancing in the middle symbolism for this part here. So when you take the internal consciousness of thought and emotion and the external consciousness of actions, well, what does that represent? That represents consciousness as a whole. Consciousness as a whole. A whole. Unified in green. If you look at my previous work on the Trinity of consciousness, I have that where blue is internal, red is external, and green is unified. So when you unify the blue and the red, you're going to get green. So when you unify your internal consciousness and your external consciousness, you're no longer divided, you're whole, you're sovereign, self-mastery, self-control, etc., etc. But when you have thought and emotion and action together, well, that's you. That's all of you. That's all of consciousness, rather than just internal consciousness, and then the expression as external consciousness and action. If you're looking at the Trinity together, well, that's all in green, because it's all you. It's all consciousness. It's all self. It's all soul. And it's all of the ego. So the tree is in green because it represents all of us. And we have aspects in the blue and in the red in terms of internal and in terms of external. Not in terms of higher and lower, literally better or worse. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about good and bad, as the previous infographics were showing. Just higher Again, I'm relating it to the sky and the ground. I'm going to invert it soon, but I'm keeping with the previous symbolism so that you can tie things together more easily. So the internal consciousness, thought and emotion, the abstraction, imagination, and subjective. Well, in order to get there, you need to base it on a firm grounding in reality. You need to have a big root base in order to produce more leaves and branches, branching up into higher consciousness and understanding. More abstraction, more imagination in the subjective realm. You need to be grounded in reality, grounded in the, quote, matter, in the physical of the actual, which is finite. And this is grounding, and this is reality, and this is objective. This is where things start. This is why it's the primacy of existence in order to evolve consciousness. You need to be grounded in reality, a strong foundation, integrated, and not just in fantasy land, growing branches and leaves out to wherever you want, without any grounding in reality, just in pure abstraction and imagination. You're going to get lost in a fantasy land of believing whatever you want. This is a hard process for us to delineate. So again, grounding in reality. Deeper roots means deeper growth above the roots in consciousness of an internal kind. So in image 7, we're going to relate this to consciousness in terms of the previous work on the Trinity of consciousness that I've done in many ways relating to causality and the Trivium. So again, to follow with above and below, I'm keeping the colors, but after this infographic, things are going to change to how I've normally described the Trinity, as thought and emotion as on the bottom, leading to action at the top as the pinnacle of the triangle, as the culmination point of where we need to get to, is to act in the world based on our internal aspects of our thoughts and emotions. That's why the upward pointing triangle is more accurate, which is where I'll be going in the next infographic. But for now, I'm just tying it into the previous 6 infographics of blue and a red-brown, earthy for the ground, and then a whiter black, and then a bluer red comparison, just in order to delineate between internal consciousness and external consciousness, just like we can delineate between higher consciousness and lower consciousness. Not that they're the same. I'm not saying internal consciousness is higher and external consciousness is lower. These are just symbolic terms to refer to things. They can't be applied blindly across different contexts. Symbolism is very powerful, but it's also very loose, and people can get confused in how they use it. So here we have consciousness, which is metaphysics. And then on the bottom we have existence, which is physics. So in consciousness we have higher order, quote, higher order, which is mental, and it's, quote, spiritual. It's the potential. And this is the ideal, what can be generated, because this is what internal consciousness does. Is we are the spirit, we are the mental, we are the potential, we are the infinite, and from the abstractive imagination ideas, we can envision the ideal. Ideal comes from an idea. That's all it is. The ideal is merely from our minds. That's the only place it does exist. And then we project, anthropomorphize, and personify it into some actual being called God that exists somewhere else, and oh, that's the perfect ideal, and blah, blah. I've fallen for this trap before too. So conceptually you can create this concept of God and these things. But now I'm delineating between the concept and actual grounding in reality. Now the actual grounding in reality is that these things are just ideals. These are ideas, concepts, imaginations, abstractions that we come up with based on reality. So we create the ideal of good and truth and morality and all that. Perfectly fine, and we're going to try to create them in reality. But they don't exist as an ideal yet in reality. We need to make them exist. That's why we are God, we are the generator, we are the creator. Because we're going to bring these ideals that we invent from our imagination, from the abstraction engine of the imagination factory of our consciousness. We can bring the ideals as possible potentials of what can be generated and bring them into the real of what is generated, into reality, into the quote lower order, the physical matter of the actual. Because matter, the existence, the quote lower order, I put it in quotes just to emphasize it's not actually lower, it's in quotes, just as a lower order. But it's the actual, that's where the grounding is in reality, is in the actual. Not in the potential, not in the possible, not in the imaginal. That's not where you do your grounding. Because that's the fantasy realm, the subjective multiverse of imagination, as I've put under here. The ideal is what can be generated, but that's from our subjective multiverse, from imagination, from abstraction. It doesn't exist. It's only a potential. It's only spiritual. That's why I have quote in spirit. Spirit in quote for consciousness and metaphysics and quote higher order. Because it's all inside of us. That's all it is. And we're projecting it outwards. We're projecting it onto things. In my other work, and I'll be showing a remade version on the roots in terms of how this applies in higher and lower. Once they're flipped and the blue's on the bottom and the red's on the top. And if you've seen my other work on the circle of life or causality, consciousness, choice, and trivium, you'll see how I have the red on the top and the blue on the bottom based on the proper orientation of the triangle with the culmination of actions on top. It's all just symbolism for how the spirit is symbolism for what's unseen and what's internal. That's what we use it for when we project outwards into the reality that we can't see. Oh, we say the other dimensions are quote spiritual and blah 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 is quote spiritual because, well, we simply just can't see it. So whatever's unseen is spiritual. Whatever's internal is spiritual. Whatever has potential is spiritual. Whatever generates or creates is spiritual. But again, it's all coming from us, from knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of reality that's grounded in reality, and then we anthropomorphize, project, and personify it outwards into other concepts that we've once again generated from within our minds, from the mental, and we create an idea, and then we make it an ideal, and then it becomes its own thing, externalized outside of us, even though it all just came from inside of us. Anyways, this is a big part of psychology, and I've gone into some of it in my other work, but it's something people really need to understand on the power of consciousness and how it's a double-edged sword and how we are our own worst enemies. It's not that you gotta kill the ego. No, it's you gotta recognize the negative ego from the positive ego. You don't kill yourself. You gotta recognize the false self and work towards the true self. That's what the soul and consciousness is. There's positive and negative. There's dual parts to it all. So in existence and physics, we have the quote lower order, the physical, the matter, the actual. And this is real. This is what is generated. In our consciousness, there's nothing real there. Nothing real. It's all ideas and ideal from a mental, imaginal realm. It's what can be generated. It's what we want to generate. Then when we actually create a truer version of reality in alignment with truth and morality, well then that reality that we're going to create in the future, based on our ideal that comes from our consciousness internally, when that actually is manifested, guess what? Then it's generated, then it's real, then it's actual. And until that's done, well, these moral ideals and better ways of living, well, they only exist in our consciousness as where we want to go, as the goal to reach. as the thing we want to create, but it's not created yet. It's not in existence. It's not part of what is real. It's not part of the objective universe and reality. So people want to say, oh, well, that's the lower order, is matter and the physical. It's less important. And oh, consciousness is the higher order. And oh, that's where the spirit is. You're the spirit, and you're mental, and all this other stuff. And oh, you're a god, and you're going to create all your thoughts. You're just going to create into reality, and you're going to create reality with your thoughts. No, not all your thoughts create reality. The thoughts that actually get to action and then you manifest in reality, well, then that's a thought that actually went into creating and altering an aspect of reality. But until you actually manifest it, it's not manifested, and it's not an actual thought creating reality. You have a million thoughts. They don't all become reality. So people who say things like thoughts create reality, they're oversimplifying it with erroneous terminology, and then they end up sounding like a woo-woo new ager, blowing smoke up their ass and talking bullshit. But what they mean is some thoughts have the potential to affect reality through our ability to act on our thoughts. So thought and emotion are the internal manifestations of consciousness, and action is the external manifestation of consciousness. So we have the internal, quote, causal realm that generates into and affects the external realm of, quote, effects. So I have them in quote again, the causal in quote and the effects in quote, because people get under the misconception that existence and physical matter and the actual is the lower order, and it's oh, well, that's an effect, it's not as important as the cause, and everything needs to be in the realm of cause. That's because people don't understand that there's a dual aspect to causes and effects. Causes and effects in terms of human consciousness, yes, the power to create change for us as human beings is in the causal realm of our consciousness. Once we've acted, the action's already taken place. If we want to change how we act, we need to go back into the causal internal realm, and that's going to generate into and affect the external realm of effects. But that's not to say that the consciousness is the primacy of consciousness, and that's what supersedes all, because that's the causal realm, and consciousness is the causal realm, so that means all of reality is lower order, matter, physical, and that's only the effects, and therefore it's created by a consciousness, and that's why God has to exist, because all of reality is just an effects. These are all just matter, physical, lower order effects. And the real thing is the real actual, the absolute. Oh yeah, the absolute is that higher order mental, spiritual God consciousness that created everything. But you see, these are just ideas that we have in our minds to try to make sense of origin and creation and why we're here. But they're just ideas, and people take them as literal. And then they take these concepts of how we create, and then they project them, personify and anthropomorphize onto questions of origins and creation and why we're here. So now we recognize that we are gods and generators and creators ourselves in terms of our actions in the world. Well, now that gets blindly corresponded to this bigger conception of the origin of the universe and origin of all reality. And now, well, there you go, that's a consciousness, and that's the causal realm, and it created everything. But it's all based on our understanding of ourselves and reality and projecting onto other concepts and ideas. We are our own worst enemies. Look at the history of religion and understand how this is coming about. We've been doing this for a long time, projecting bullshit onto reality based on our internal subjective fantasies. So we have In blue, the top, the internal manifestations of consciousness, thought and emotion, that's the ideal mind. But the actual, the things that actually exist, that's why actions matter, because your actions, act yun and act ul, they're from the same root, act, and from the same root as axiom and actual. These are all the foundations of our understanding of everything. The understanding of ourselves and reality comes from reality. That's why the primacy of existence is first. It's not the primacy of consciousness. Without reality, you wouldn't understand anything. And just to go back on the previous example and what I'm talking about, consciousness, self, ego, will, care, soul, all of these things, it's in green because it's us, it's the totality of us. Then you have different aspects, internal and external. And we need to recognize our power in both the internal and external realm and harmonize ourselves, to develop ourselves in both these capacities in order to create properly into the world as a proper green tree, using them both. And that's why in my work I express internal as blue, external as red, and green as unified, because it represents the unity of the green, the blue and the red. It represents the totality of who we are, rather than only two parts of who we are and one part of who we are. The two parts in the blue as thought and emotion, and one part in the red as action. Well, if you look at it as a whole consciousness, as a whole self, as a whole soul, as a whole ego, as a whole will, as a whole care, that's why I use green to represent care, will, consciousness, courage, will, the self, because it's all representative of the whole aspect of who we are. So yes, ego, superego, id, and other classifications. So yes, you would include those into all of who we are, and sure, the ego is just the I, but that is who you are. The consciousness is who you are. You want to look at all these things about, how you're not you and all these things, then who are you if you're not you and you're not born here? And you're something somewhere else. It's all externalized again. All our powers being externalized. We're actually somewhere else, and we need to ascend to the fifth dimension and ascend and transcend the limitations of this world, and we want to go back home. All this new age fluffy puff bullshit about escapism into the world so that we don't have to actually learn to ground ourselves in an understanding of reality to do what needs to be done. No, just stay in the fluffy puff clouds and think of whatever fantasies you want, abstraction and imagination in your subjective multiverse, and then just project that outwards as if it was reality. So on the image 7 here, and I have mind over matter. That's where the phrase comes from, is mind over matter. It's not literally, your thoughts and the placebo effect. Yes, I recognize there's certain aspects of our consciousness to affect our body. So there is that aspect, but in the greater sense, it's the mind over matter in terms of developing your mind so that you can have an accurate control over matter, developing the quote mind and the quote heart of the thoughts and emotions, internal aspects of consciousness, so that you can manifest in action properly, so that your mind is over matter, rather than being led by your lower self as the matter over your mind, or not following the truth in your thoughts and emotions and just acting based on falsity. So your matter over your mind. It's mind over matter in the way that I'm explaining it. This is how I'm using it here. So we can pierce the veil of the seen physical dimension of effect into the unseen, quote, spiritual dimension of causality. That's what we do at metaphysics. We try to look, we're all people, we're all human. Me, you, the other person, what could we all call that? What do we all belong to? We all belong to human, the human animal. And that's our species. So it doesn't exist itself. It's nowhere in physicality. It doesn't exist. Human being does not exist. but it is a property of who we are. It's a secondary substance, not a primary substance. So if you want more information on that, you can check out my Metaphysics, Language, and Reality Fundamentals of the Trivium Method presentation. So the masculine matter and effects pierce to the feminine, quote, spiritual causal realm, from physics of appearances to metaphysics of substance. Because when you see things, you're not going to get piercing through the truth of it all. If you just look at the appearances, you're not going to see the substance. So this is a symbolism I've been using in some of my recent audio. That we're going to go from our grounding in reality, the masculine matter and effects, and we need to pierce through to the feminine spiritual causal realm. Pierce through to it. So from the physics of appearances, which would be false appearances, to the metaphysics of substance, which will bring us the real appearance of things, the real substance that the appearances hide, that the veil hides. So that's where we have to pierce the veil of the material to the immaterial, unseen. And this is what spiritual is. That's all it is it's unseen, it's spiritual. There you go. Case closed. That's what the word means in the general sense. And then there's different applications. Okay, well, spiritual in terms of consciousness. All of them are spiritual in terms of other energies and other dimensions and other beings, and you call them spiritual if you want. But all it is just unseen, it's internal, or it's feminine, etc. But it's all just symbolism. It's all it is. And people take it literally. So again, we have anthropomorphizing, personification, projection of ourselves onto reality and existence, onto conceptions of cause and origins. We can understand how we generate into reality, create into reality, affect reality, then we project this self-knowledge onto conceptions of origins and creation of reality itself. So, quote, God concept is derived, and we conceptualize ourselves as gods and creators of the world, as is seen in New Ageism fantasy where man becomes God, creator of the whole universe. Since we already understand how we're creators, we're generators from our internal aspects, the internal, quote, spiritual, quote, higher order, quote, causal realm generates into and affects the external realm through our actions as our external manifestation of consciousness. We recognize our power, our great power, to bring the potential into the actual, from what can be generated to what is generated. That's a lot of power. That's God power. That's creation and generation. So from understanding ourselves and the basic correspondence between self and the reality, well then we project onto other concepts of creation and origins, and now, well, that's the source, the one, the absolute God, creator, generator. And then we reverse project that back onto us again in New Age and fantasy where man becomes God, creator of the whole universe, and we're God itself. And so it's all projection, anthropomorphizing, and personification of concepts we derive. First from ourselves and reality, referencing to ourselves, and then we project it onto things that aren't even in reality, things that aren't even actual in existence, but they're just ideas of ideals from our mind, and we project onto them. Things that we can understand in reality, we're going to project onto these other things that we can't understand because of the simple fact that we can't understand it. So we're going to analogize, metaphorize, and bring in comparisons and try to project ourselves and other understandings we have onto these concepts in order to make sense of them. But in the end, all it is a projection. It might be true, but you've arrived at it through a projection. So if we are causal generators from mind, and we create into the world of effects, then we assume that mind or consciousness is primacy before existence, and hence created existence. So we recognize our power in reality as generators and creators, as quote gods, right? That we are the causal generators from our mind, and we create into the world of effects. So that's why this is where the causal application is valid, in terms of how we operate as a unified being, as a consciousness, self, soul, ego, care, courage, and willful, intelligent being, as a whole self. We're going to project that onto other things and assume that since we are the creators through our actions, and the generators through our actions, and gods through our actions into the world, well, then we're going to assume that mind and consciousness itself is primary to existence and is the primacy of consciousness over the primacy of existence. So then we conclude that this mind and consciousness as a primacy is what created existence. I'm just explaining things logically in the way conceptions were derived. This is how we got to this conclusion. It's all logical. First comes reality, then comes knowledge about reality, then comes symbol, language, word, to express the knowledge about reality. So first you see reality as it operates. Then you learn about yourself, and reality in reference to yourself and how you operate. And you recognize, oh look, there's internal consciousness and I express it externally. I'm a god, I'm a generator, I'm a creator. And then this all gets anthropomorphized, projected, and personified onto other concepts that we have from our consciousness, from our mind. And then it just becomes a reality, and it becomes literal. So this is a fallacy of false correspondence and blind analogy. This is how all of these concepts have been invented, through projection of ourselves onto them, in a mirroring capacity that produces fallacies, because only the mirroring, analogous correspondence is being looked at for imagined concepts or ideas. False and erroneous correspondences created in consciousness can lead away from objective understanding of reality. That's why I have the infographic number 6. Yeah, the one right before this, where we have to ground ourselves in reality. If you're getting lost in the fantasy of imagination and speculation and abstraction of your subjective realm, well, most likely you're not going to be very grounded in reality if that's where you stay in. Everything needs to be grounded back in reality in order to understand reality and existence and what matters. All these ideas and concepts about God and all these other things that are just from your mind and from thought and consciousness and wherever you want to claim it comes from, other entities, meditation, feeling it and resonating, whatever. All these other concepts are not required in order to understand truth and morality and understand the importance of truth and morality in order to create a heaven on earth. You don't need all these speculations and all these concepts. They might be true. I can't prove them untrue. I can't prove a negative. How are you going to prove a negative? If someone doesn't commit a crime, how are you going to prove that they didn't commit a crime? So, all these concepts and these imaginations and these speculations and these ideas and these models and these frameworks, they're perfectly valid to have. But again, they're speculations, they're beliefs. And they're not required in order to evolve consciousness. They're not required at all. In my understanding, they're actually a hindrance in progressive evolution of consciousness. They actually keep you back because it's a belief. And then you're attached to the belief because it provides answers of origins and creation and why we're here, and it removes the insecurity, the doubt, the discomfort, the darkness and void and abyss of the unknown and the fear of the unknown, and etc. A lot of psychological aspects of how easily we are influenced by ideas and conceptions. My point is, you don't need them. You can believe in them, but do not promote them as truth. You're allowed to believe whatever you want. All of my work has been trying to describe truth of reality that we can use in reality. And with my reevaluation of my model and framework in the past month, I've been able to ground things even more in reality. So all my work is to base understanding in reality. I don't care about the conceptions of all these other things and all these possibilities in terms of presenting them as truth. I'll care to look into them and possibilities and beliefs and maybe even probabilities, who knows. But in terms of understanding what's most important, self-knowledge, becoming a higher self, a truer self, a realer self, to create in truth and morality, you don't need these speculative beliefs. All you need is a grounding in reality to understand truth and morality. That's my point. So now we have image 8. So here I'm talking, here's the inversion that I'm talking about. So the rest of them are going to be resituated in terms of my previous work. The previous 3 or more infographics, 5 or whatever. There was the Trinity of Consciousness, Unity Consciousness, Circle of Life, Causal Agents, Reap in Reality, Causality, Consciousness, Choice, and Trivium. Maybe a few other ones, but I've used the triangle this way, with thought and emotion on the bottom as the base, and then with action as the resulting pinnacle that we strive towards. We were going towards action. If you only have thought and emotion, and you can know everything about the universe, but if you're not acting on it, then it's completely useless. If you're not sharing it, it's completely useless. And if you're just acting in the world on ignorance and you don't know what you're doing, because you don't have truth attained from internal consciousness, well then you're just acting as an idiot in ignorance. So this is the Trinity of Consciousness. Consciousness generation in reality is what it represents. As has already been explained in previous images and infographics in this presentation, as well as other infographics and presentations. You should already understand what I mean by that, in terms that thoughts and emotions in the internal realm of consciousness manifests externally as action in the world. And that's how we generate and create in reality. So existence is, quote, the effect. It's external. It's matter, physical, actual, and finite. Consciousness, the, quote, cause, is internal. And it's the, quote, spirit. And it's mental. It's the potential, and it's infinite. So thoughts and emotions are the foundation of consciousness. They're principal, and they're first. And you can look at the, quote, first cause as in, quote, God. And you can see how this, again, reflects, as I've been saying, about our anthropomorphizing, personifying, and projecting ourselves onto other concepts. So when the principal first things in terms of ourselves as a unified whole of consciousness, self, soul, ego, all that, we have aspects within us that are the foundation of consciousness, and that would be thoughts and emotions. They're the foundation that lead us to the pinnacle of where we need to get to, which is right action, which is the wisdom of right action. So it's the foundation of consciousness, but it's not the foundation between existence and consciousness. The primacy goes to existence. In order to understand ourselves and reality, the primacy is in reality, the primacy of existence. But our foundation for ourselves is within our thoughts and emotions in order to project externally. And on the right of this infographic, I have a little part just on simple cause and effect and how it works. And this is from the next part of the presentation, part 2, in terms of causality. I have different folders with a few images, so there's this main set of like 14 images, and then the next one has about 10 or something. So this is from that next set of causality and the prime ratio. And the prime ratio is 1:1. That's because from a cause you have an effect. It's a 1:1, but it's also reciprocal and recursive, this process of generation, as I will explain in that causality prime second part. And as if you followed my other work on the circle of life and thought and emotion as a causality, consciousness, choice, and trivium, you will note that I have described thought, emotion towards action as producing effects in reality that affect things in reality, and then those effects in reality that affect reality can have an effect upon us, which then allows us to generate more causes. So that effect that affected us is itself a causal force for us to generate our own cause to bring out as an effect in action, which then will go out into the world as an effect and affect other people, and then for them it becomes a causal force. That effect becomes a force to generate a cause within themselves and then generate an effect. And that's how cause and effect is represented as a 1:1 in terms of reciprocity and recursive. It's also in the Ouroboros and the infinity symbol. It keeps going. It's limited within yourself because what you output also affects you, but it's more in terms of the aggregate co-creation in reality as a collective, where we output into the world and affect reality, and then everyone's doing this, 7 billion of us, and then whatever other people do can also affect us. So it's a cause-effect, 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 cause-effect in many variations and degrees, and it's all connected. And this is, I believe this is what's behind chaos theory. The only thing I know about chaos theory is it's from Jurassic Park. I haven't bothered to look into it. I understand the gist of it. And the butterfly flaps its wings and causes a hurricane. It doesn't actually do that, but every input, every cause, and the effect can snowball and reciprocate into other aspects that seem unrelated but are related. And this is where you get, people want to project synchronicity as some magical force, but it's just you in time and someone else in time doing something in time at the same place, or different places but the same time, because it's synchronicity. It's synchro, together in time. That's all it means. That's all synchronicity means. So when you do things together in time, and synchronicity happen, well, it's just together in time. And where did that effect happen? How did you get to where you are? How did the other person get to where you are? Well, it's all based on cause and effect in perceptible and imperceptible levels. And it's very complex, the objective natural law of cause and effect. I'm not talking natural moral law of human behavior. I'm just talking natural law, cause and effect. Overall, cause and effect is everywhere. It has nothing to do with morality. It just has to do with cause and effect. That's an aspect of reality we live in. And when it comes to the moral sphere, the human sphere and the human dimension, then morality is applied, or higher order consciousness beings, other aliens, whatever, then morality is applied because of the capacity to understand it, and we can reflect it from ourselves, that understanding, or not. Reflect morality or reflect immorality. So again, the consciousness of thought and emotion is first in order to generate an action. This corresponds to the internal aspects of consciousness being the foundation and the first cause before actions are created in reality. This makes consciousness the first cause, the prime mover, the quote God. So when you correspond, you can see how things get twisted and diverted in the telephone line. Now we're externalizing ourselves, we're anthropomorphizing, personifying, and projecting ourselves onto a conceptual first cause, a prime mover, what is called God, based on our own aspects of consciousness and how we recognize internally, we produce externally, but the external is what affects us to make us into who we are as individuals, as an ego personality identity construct based in falsity or based in truth and based in mixes of both. So the primacy of consciousness is only valid for how we, as consciousness, generate into reality. Then this is analogized and corresponded to other imagined, quote, forces and given the same import, whereby all of reality itself is created by the first cause consciousness of, quote, God. So we started from ourselves and we projected these ideas outward and we mirrored them onto reality, onto the questions that we want answers to, onto the source, origins, onto creation and why we're here. The primacy of consciousness is only for us, not reality itself. There's primacy of existence is first, and how we generate into reality, how we can alter reality by creating actions into reality. That's where the primacy of consciousness is. It's for us, because our thoughts and emotions lead to the actions. But then we want to project this and personify and anthropomorphize it into a conception of a, quote, God. Oh, and now it's got thoughts and emotions, it's got a will of its own, it's got desires and care of its own, and it created all of reality and it created everything. It could be, but I see this as merely projection, personification, and anthropomorphizing of ourselves, of knowledge of ourselves and knowledge of reality reflected through ourselves. And everything needs to pass through the filter of us, the filter of the subjective lens in order to make sense of it. So we project how we understand ourselves onto other things in order to understand it. So it could be the conception is real. I'm not going to state it as a real. It's a belief. It's a speculation. Merely because you can project, mirror, correspond yourself onto a concept does not make the concept an actuality in reality. So the primacy of consciousness is only for us, not reality itself. Reality itself, objectively, is based in the primacy of existence, not consciousness. Because you see, the primacy of consciousness, as we understand ourselves from thoughts and emotions to generate in reality, we're not creating reality itself. Reality was already there. That's why it's the primacy of existence. And in terms of us, there is an aspect of primacy of consciousness because in order to create actions, it's based on thoughts and emotions. So that's where the causal link and the effect link comes in. But that's only in terms of us. It's not in terms of all of reality. In all of reality, it's not the primacy of consciousness that created all of reality. That's just an anthropomorphizing, personification, and projection of ourselves onto reality in order to make sense of it. So just people, oh, look at how we create into reality, and then we're going to get lost in blind correspondence and say, well, that's how reality got created in the first place. It's just this big, all one pervasive consciousness that created it all. Is that possible? Sure. Is it probable? Maybe. But it does not validate the primacy of consciousness in how reality functions. The primacy of consciousness is for how we function in reality and how we generate, create as gods in reality. But guess what? Existence was there before you and me. So primacy of existence supersedes the primacy of consciousness. We ourselves are based in the primacy of existence, for without a body to exist, we would not have an emergent consciousness to operate within reality. Primacy of consciousness applies when understanding how we operate in the world, that it is our internal consciousness modalities that generate our affections onto the world through effects. So the internal consciousness of thought and emotions generates an external consciousness modality of action, and that action produces an effect which affects reality, and all those affections that we generate into the world will then impact and affect others and ourselves. So in image number 9, we have the Trivium method. So keeping in line with what is generated, the physical, the actuality, the effect. Well, this is where grammar and rhetoric are situated. And in blue, why it is generated, the force potentiality, the cause. Well, this is where logic is. And again, mirroring the previous one on the Trinity of consciousness, of thoughts and emotions, well, this is logic, and this is the foundation, the principle, and what is first. This applies to the law of logic and how it's all pervasive in reality and is a foundation for reality. So the unseen, quote, spiritual, quote, metaphysical aspects such as laws, the law of logic, thermodynamics, if that's a real law, gravity, cause and effect, they all underlie existence of physical things that exist. So, if you know the Trivium method or my previous work, we have grammar is where you start. So it's not principle and first, and it is principle and first in that sense, because you need reality to start from, which is what I've been saying. In the primacy of existence is you need to have a foundation and roots grounded in reality in order to grow in consciousness. So you intake grammar, that's reality input, and you're affected by that intake, by that input of grammar. You're affected by it. Something in the world that exists as an actuality, what is already generated, and it's coming into your consciousness, and then you can determine why that is there, why the what is there. And this is where you use logic, try to deduce what you've induced from your grammar input. But between grammar and logic, there's always logic. Even in the grammar phase, an induction is a part of logic. It's just not the more powerful, higher order deductive aspect to verify if what we imagine can be verified in reality. That's why you need deduction. Because you can imagine anything you want and induct that from reality and pretend that exists in reality. So from a proper logical processing, eventually you output in reality as rhetoric, and that affects reality. So we have the input affected by, and then the output affecting. So this is just the basic model of the Trivium. If you want more information on the Trivium, I have my recent Metaphysics, Language, and Reality, the Fundamentals of the Trivium Method. I also have the 5-part series on language and reality. Previous to that, I have a few infographics, such as the natural law, Trivium and consciousness chart, the circle of life, the causality, consciousness, choice, and Trivium chart. So that's 4 or 5 things that you can look into if you want more information on the Trivium from my work. So this is just a basic introduction. You'll notice in the image 8, it was an upright triangle because it was internal thoughts and emotions to actions external. And this one's an inverted triangle because you start from grammar and rhetoric are found in reality, whereas logic is a process inside of consciousness in order to output into reality and intake from reality. So you can see how the symbolism matches up, and it's an inverted triangle this time. So what happens when you join the 2 triangles? Well, we get to image 10, and I call it the hexagram of consciousness. And I've never joined them up in a hexagram before. I've always represented the 3 aspects of consciousness and the 3 aspects of the Trivium as a circle. So first was the circle of life, and then the other one was a circle. So I've never done them in 2 triangles. So if you put them as 2 triangles, it fits perfectly beautiful as a hexagram. So in the previous work, you start from grammar to thought to logic to emotion to rhetoric and action. And I just have an additional description on the left part where we have a finite range in reality, but an infinite range in imagination. Because internally in consciousness, we have the subjective multiverse, and we can create many different realities and an infinite amount of possibilities, and we always have to choose one. From the potential imagination, we choose one action amongst many. And we finite the infinite. From internally, we bring it externally into something that actually exists, and we put it into the finite of reality. So that's a short description there. Going to the next image 11. This is a recreation on the previous circle of life. You can call it the wheel of life, which is what I've understand now in my recent research relating to the 4 elements and the wheel of life and the tarot and dharma and karma. So the wheel of life, the circle of life. And this reflects the previous work I've done on the circle of life and causality, consciousness, choice, and Trivium infographics, where we have grammar as a stimulus, which is knowledge of the who, what, where, when, and we use thought to derive that. It comes in as stimulus in our thoughts. And then we have logic and processing to develop a why for the who, what, where, when, as also a why onto understanding how we can generate into reality as a response. So determining the why is the causal factor, the root causal factor for the effects. So this is the cause and why realm in blue, and the red and the effect as a what. So the who, what, where, when are the grammar, and we determine the cause of that through the why. And what we're going to output as new grammar in reality, well, that's going to be based on the causal understanding of why previous things exist and why we can create the new things we can create. So we have our emotion as part of the Trinity of consciousness, where we make sure it feels right in terms of morality and care, and that it's not violating other people's rights in a bastardized form of logic, a corrupted logic devoid of care. And then we continue with our response after we've logically processed reality. We get to a wisdom and a how, the output part. So with understanding reality, we can develop other causal forces to manifest in reality, and this is the how to live, this is wisdom, and this is the rhetoric, and then it leads to our actions. Well, rhetoric is a form of action. It's an output. So we have, again, input, output. And in between the stimulus and response is the thinking. So thought, logic, understanding, and emotion. That's part of the internal thinking capacity in order to produce the response. And the goal is in wisdom of right action as our rhetoric output and our actions. So we have image 12 here. So now we're going to get into more information as it reflects the previous work I've done. You can see when I was doing these infographics, I did the hexagram of consciousness, and I saw how everything fit together, and then I had it in a circle in that previous image, going round and round. And when I was looking at that, I was like, hey, well, this looks like the base form of the flower of life, or in this form as I've drawn here in image 12. This is called the seed of life, I believe. So I've just taken it and visualized it in a different way. I was like, oh wow, look at that, it's the seed of life. I didn't realize it, because in all my previous work I made it into circles, and I didn't do the two superimposed triangles. And the way I'd previously done it, well, anyways, I never did it that way. So I never saw the hexagram, and I never saw, oh, look at the flower of life. So here you have same thing, grammar, thought, logic, emotion, rhetoric, action, but this time I've emphasized the importance of care as the driving force for the whole wheel of life, for the circle of life. The thing that makes it go round is care. And again, in green, it's the part of who we are as a united whole aspect, not as quote above or quote below or quote higher or quote lower, quote internal or quote external aspects of consciousness, just as part of all consciousness, in our thoughts and emotions and in our actions, care is always there. So it's in green as part of the core of who we are, which is consciousness, intelligence, care, desire, courage, and will is a core of who we are and what we're supposed to become. We're supposed to develop true care. We always have care. We always have thought and emotions and actions. There's always some grammar, some logic, some rhetoric. But we need to understand what these word symbols mean, what they reference in reality and ourselves, and develop them more. And the intelligence, the care, desire, courage, and will can all be developed, but at the core, we always have the consciousness and the self at the core of us, and we always have will and care, even if it's dark care and dark will. That's why I'm using it in green, as to represent more core nature, as opposed to just internal in emotion. It's what makes it go round. We care to learn, or we care to teach. So if you don't have the care to learn, your input of grammar isn't going to be very effective. You're not going to be thinking properly. You're not going to be processing and logic and understanding properly. Your emotional capacities, the thought and meaning as expressed as emotions and felt physiologically as feelings, they will not be in unison with truth, and you'll have conflicting emotions and anger and confusion based on your conflicting states of understanding reality and incongruence, disintegrity with reality. So we have care for a reason in the center, because we either care to learn and care to teach, or we don't. And we don't do that, and we don't evolve consciousness, and we don't help others evolve consciousness either. So the seed of life, again in red, is what is generated, the physical actuality, the quote effect, and it has a finite range in reality. And the blue again, why it is generated, the force potentiality, the quote cause, and it has an infinite range in imagination. And the matter, physical actuality is nature. That's the determinate existence. Things that exist are determined in nature as existing. And this influences our consciousness. So the nature, the determinate existence, they influence consciousness. They have an effect on us. Reality, the primacy of existence, has an effect on us. Both physically and internally. Quote, spiritually. That's what internally means. That's what spiritual means, in terms of symbolism. Just internal. So, this is where nurture is. Instead of nature and determinate existence, this is where nurture and random free will to influence existence. Because in nature, all there is nature. All there is are things, and they influence other things that have consciousness in them. So animals have consciousness, and nature can influence us. But the nurture, the random free will, that only comes from free will causal agents, which are animals. Nature itself isn't a random free will thing. It doesn't have nurture. It's not nurturing. The care, you know where care comes from? Consciousness beings. Beings of a lower or higher order consciousness, whatever animal you want. Care comes from us, from them. Other animals have care. Other non-human animals have care. Open your eyes to figure that one out. They just don't have it to the greater capacity or to the greater degenerative capacity of a dark care. They don't go as dark or as light as us. They're amoral. Living in nature is amorally. But they do have care. We live in nature and we can live amorally. But we can have greater care, and we can really develop the nurturing capacity to nurture our children, nurture our siblings, nurture other humans, nurture other animals. And then when we decide to use our nurturing capacity, our care and desire to output with courage and will as true and truly intelligent beings into the world, well, the rhetoric and action that we output is going to influence existence by altering it in some way. We're not creating reality, we're not creating existence, we're influencing reality, we're altering reality, we're influencing existence, and we're altering existence. The determinate existence in nature will be influenced, and then other things can happen in the great pattern of cause and effect, and things can happen sent back on us, a storm comes, whatever. Reality will influence us. It influences consciousness, and consciousness influences existence. Existence influences consciousness. Consciousness influences existence. Back and forth it goes, back and forth it goes. This is the ebb and flow that we have with reality. This is the feedback loop that we have. I've always, since last year when I've made the aspects of thought and emotion feedback on each other, at the time I had effects, actions going out to affect and affect reality that then came back into consciousness so that we could generate more thoughts and emotions and going around in circles. I just didn't call the overall thing a feedback process, but subsequent work in Circle of Life has demonstrated how it's a circle, and we feedback on ourselves through others as well. But this is how we in reality operate. The internal and the external is a feedback. So just as the internal and external in thoughts and emotions feedback with our actions as a unit, unified self, unified consciousness, unified soul, unified ego, driven by care. This is also how it works in reality, for reality to affect us and for us to affect reality. So the correspondences and analogies have a limited scope. It's not every single thing that I'm talking about in one context is applied through blind, as above, so below, correspondence to something else. You can't do that, which is where people get into the errors in their conceptual understanding of reality, of existence, of where we exist. The blind analogies and the blind correspondences cannot be done. It doesn't work. You can't take everything from one context and apply it to another. Only the things that apply actually apply. So, breaking out of a program, a law, requires free will. Care, desire is a valuation that can choose to act, good or evil, right or wrong, whereby a program would not act. See, a program is a program. It's limited. It does what it does. It's programmed to do. If you know programming, you understand this. Now, care, desire is a valuation. Programs don't have valuations. They don't have care and desire. Nature doesn't have care and desire. Free will, consciousness, has care and desire. And they can choose to act. So it is also an act that a program would do, a law, but since free will can do what it wants, there is a need for true care to be developed to harmonize with natural determinant programming. That's why nurture is a part of consciousness, and nature is everything in nature. We have nature, everything has nature. There's laws and everything for different things, but we have the nature, we have the care. A law does what it does, it's programmed to do, but a free will agent does not do what it's programmed to do in terms of its free will conscious capacity. There are subconscious processes of programmed nature, of our biological functioning. It's all automatic. We don't have to think about any of it. I'm talking about the stuff that we do consciously think of and do. So a program, a law, has no choice, but free will does what it wants. So we need the nurturing aspect, the care, to be developed so that we can harmonize with natural determinant programming, which would be natural laws, especially natural moral law, understanding the consequences to our behaviors. Free will can go along with the program of good, or it can waver, compromise, and walk down the path of ever-increasing evil. Do right or go wrong, truth or consequence. It is one way. And along the journey, we're walking the checkerboard floor and we're doing both things, and it's a process of learning what is falsity, what is wrong, what is inauthentic, what is devolved, and letting go of it in order to become more of what we're supposed to be. A truer self, a realer self, a higher self, with a realer will, a truer will, and a higher will of doing things based in truth and morality, rather than a lower will based in a false self of an amoral or even more degenerate consciousness of carnal, fleshly, beastly, pleasure trap and comfort gratifications. So the false correspondence is that people think consciousness is why reality is what it is. And I've been demonstrating how we're projecting and personifying and anthropomorphizing ourselves onto other conceptions of reality. So we apply aspects of ourselves and the primacy of consciousness onto reality, and we apply nurture, and we apply care and desire and intelligence and courage and will onto things in nature and reality, even though they don't have it. You have to have a consciousness to have those things. So in people's conception, the only way the universe comes into being is with the consciousness, just as we create actions in reality. Then this consciousness created reality, I guess in the void. It's not creating actions to change and alter reality. It's creating reality to change and alter the void, or whatever conception people want to have. Like I said, I don't know if it's true or not. I'm not going to claim it's true, and I'm not going to claim it's false. If you want to claim it's true, you better come out with some proof, or else it's just a speculative conception. Oh, it might be true. I accept the possibility and the belief. I have that belief. But I'm not going to go parading it around and parroting it and preaching it and teaching it and sharing it, because it's not important. You need to get grounded back in reality and really delineate from the things that are important, that can be actually verified, and see how they can be used in order to facilitate an enhancement of understanding truth and morality in the reality we live in, truth and morality in the reality we live in, as opposed to all these speculative, imagined fantasy conceptions, models, frameworks, and beliefs. Which one's more important? Working on grounding reality that can bring you to understand truth and morality to greater degrees, or focusing on things in some other realm, some other dimension, some other reality that has nothing to do with you here and now, has nothing to do with your existence here and now, has nothing to do with improving the quality of your life in a real way, and actually creating a heaven on earth instead of a hell. You don't need any of those conceptions and speculations. But why do people focus on them so much? And again, we come back to the fear of the unknown, the fear of the void and the darkness of not having an answered question, the doubt, the insecurity, the discomfort, and also the infatuation with novelty and the new, and not looking at the old. People just want to stay in the realm of speculation and imagination, keep inventing new things, new things, new things, new things in the mind. Because it works the same way externally as well. We get infatuated with all this technology and new things and new ways of doing things, and new gadgets and new phones and new games and new. Well, that's what we're doing in our minds as well. We have an infatuation with the new conceptions, new ideas, the newest information, the newest news out there, the newest catastrophe, the newest spiritual, mystical thing. We're always trying to expand more and new things in our minds, but we're not looking at ourselves in the old. We're not looking at our mirror to look back at what we're currently doing and seeing what needs to be fixed. We're fixated on the future and the new and escapism, getting out of the here and now, and we want to go to our home in the fifth dimension. Again, this is all projection and belief that that's where you come from. Reality? No, it's not reality. It's all a belief. And then you live your life based on that bullshit belief. Again, priorities. What's more important? All these speculations and beliefs of alleged, possible dimensions, planes, beings, all this other stuff, I don't really care about it. I've said it before. Or the most important thing, which is truth and morality, and figuring out how to actualize, realize, individuate ourselves more in alignment with truth and morality, and helping other people do the same. What's more important? It should be pretty clear if you have an understanding of our current condition on this planet and the immense amount of work we need to do to correct it, and what actually is required to correct it. The former speculative beliefs, or the latter concrete grounding in reality of truth and morality. What's more important? It's pretty simple once you understand what really matters. Self-knowledge is all about truth and morality. It has nothing to do with all these other speculations and dimensions and beings and God concepts and all this other crap. That's not self-knowledge. It has no importance in terms of creating, actualizing truth and morality and creating a heaven on earth. Zero importance. So now we have image 13. This is the wheel of life as the egg of life. I found this representation of just the central part. It's not the egg of life of just the seven spheres, but I've found this as referencing the egg of life and not the seed of life and not the flower of life, as that's the bigger one. And the previous image was the seed of life, and this is a two-dimensional representation of the egg of life from the seven spheres. egg of life that is normally shown. Anyways, that's what I found in just looking at the terminology for something of life. It's not the flower, it's not the seed. Well, it turns out that it's the egg it's referred to as, or the flower of life, rosette. Anyways, this is the popular symbol that you see of the 6 points with the spokes to the 7th one. The spokes are the Vesica Pisces connections. So the wheel of life, egg of life, consciousness, feedback, generation in reality. And that's the consciousness and reality feedback. We feed reality and reality feeds us, and it's reciprocal, it keeps going. There's a parallel processing. We sow into reality to affect it, and we reap from reality for it to affect us. So again, the left side is the same, and the right side is the same, except for the middle part. So in the left middle, we care to learn, and that's to consume, and that's where we reap. We reap, we experience the effects. That's where they affect and influence us in our subjective multiverse realm. So we care to learn and we consume. Even if we don't want to learn and we don't want to consume, we're still going to reap experiences and effects of reality that affect and influence us. Now, when we're caring to teach and generate, we have the consummation and the generation. The consummation is input, where we're reaping, and the generation is what we're sowing, what we're outputting. So when we sow, we create an effect. We affect and influence reality, the objective universe. So one is reality affecting us, the subjective multiverse, and then the other way is us affecting and influencing the objective universe. One is experiencing the effects coming in, one is creating the effect going out. So this one looks more like the previous work I've done on the circle of life and causality, consciousness, choice, and trivium, where you have grammar, input, and knowledge as the what. And that's where we consume. And then internally, we have our thoughts, represented by our minds, and emotions as our heart, quote mind and quote heart, but all in consciousness anyways. Then we have curiosity, doubt, and question. We have more processing and understanding through logic and uncovering the why for the what that was produced in order to get to the how of the rhetoric, output, and wisdom. Why, from the what to the why, in order to output how and how to live. To know how to live, we need to understand and process and find answers to questions. So from that logic and processing, we develop true intelligence. From the heart and emotion in alignment with our thoughts, we can develop true courage in order to develop the will to actualize how we want to live or how we need to live as a rhetoric, output, and wisdom, and the actions. And this is symbolic of our guts and our stomach, as Mark Passio has mentioned. So the symbolism of the mind, the symbolism of the heart, and the symbolism of the guts. Not literal, they're in quotes, it's symbolism. And you have care in the middle again, generating it all, making it go around. We care to learn and we care to teach. If we don't care to learn, it's going to be garbage in probably, and then garbage out. And if we don't care to teach, well, we're just going to keep everything in, even if we want to learn all our lives. If we don't teach it, if we don't share it, if we don't create in the world, that all amounts to nothing, essentially. So that's the summary of that one. I could go, re-explain things that I've already explained in previous images, but that's why I went into more detail at those level of less information in those images. So that when I got to this one, I wouldn't have as much to talk about and explain. So you can go back and listen to what I've explained about the previous ones and relate it to this one. And go look at the other infographics and see how they relate to this one. You can also go look at my other work and see how it relates to this. The other work has some more information, has less information in terms of certain descriptors, it has additional ones and descriptions and symbolism that I've used before. So you can go look at that if you want. And now we have image number 4. So this is the same one as the previous one, but I've changed a few things on the left side, as you can see, and on the top right. Apart from that, everything's the same except for the additional green levels that I've added to represent care for truth. If you're, so this is meshing in another of my infographics into the other infographics that I've made. So this one I took the care for truth infographic that I made on the 2 truths and the 2 levels of truth and the 4 levels of caring for truth, which the great work is a part of the care for truth. So again, it's care for truth, feedback generation in reality. It's all about feedback and generation in reality. How to live. So all this information is about. It's all self-knowledge. Truth and morality is all about that, essentially. So truth level 1, that which is or has manifested into existence. This is actual reality. And we have truth level 2, the right path and way of living in truth, good, right, morality. This is potential reality. So one is objective reality, and the other one is subjective reality, the subjective multiverse, and the other one is the objective reality in the objective universe. So we have the primacy of existence to be. Things that are. It is. Is, are, and be are the same verb in different whatever tenses or expressions of symbols and tenses, whatever. But is, are, and be is the same thing. So the primacy of existence to be, because it is what is. Because you see, what's inside of consciousness, what's inside of imagination and abstraction, isn't. It isn't is, it isn't being, it isn't are. It's not in reality. It's in your subjective reality. It's in your mind. It does not exist. But this is the power of consciousness to change. The primacy of existence to be, and the power of consciousness to change. We can affect and alter the world we live in and the way we live and how we live, which is what this is all leading towards, the culmination of the Trinity of consciousness from thought, emotion to action. That's the culmination as to how to live properly. So you need to input from the primacy of existence, the grammar of what, ground yourself in reality, process it, understand it, and then you'll have an answer in order to provide you with how to live in reality, and you can have the intelligence, courage, and will to do so. So we consume reality to generate and create in reality. So from the previous infographic, care to learn, consume, and care to teach, generate. We consume reality to generate and create. So everything else is the same as the previous one, except for those 4 levels of truth, which I've gone into more detail in Care for Truth infographic. There's an audio and video presentation on. You can find that on my site. So we have the care for right over wrong, care for higher living, higher consciousness, higher self, truer self, etc. It's all about climbing that ladder, elevating in grades and degrees and levels to reach higher and higher levels of being, higher and higher levels of consciousness. And I've also added little feedback between actions and grammar just to demonstrate that the feedback happens there. It keeps feeding back, not necessarily ourselves into ourselves, but we output into reality and then reality inputs into us. So first we have in the care for truth in green, we have level 1 care for truth, which is to seek truth. Then we have thoughts and processing, etc. So that's where we're seeking the truth. And then we need to get to level 2 of embracing and accepting the truth as it is. So when we reach logic, processing, and understanding, we're going to understand what is in reality. We're going to verify it and process it. Not just going to be a blind robot in stimulus response with no processing or hardly any. You need to process it in order to accept and embrace the truth as it is. Because first you're going to seek it, but you might reject it. So I have more descriptions in this in my work as well. Coming to mind is my chart on natural law, Trivium, and consciousness. So after we accept and embrace the truth, we can get to that's where we develop intelligence, because we're seeking the truth, and then once we accept and embrace the truth, well, that develops intelligence, that evolves consciousness. Then we get to level 3, to embody and be truth. And you're going to bring it into, it's already into your knowledge and understanding, but now you got to make it part of who you are. So you got to embody and be the truth. So this is a part and part, a rhetoric and a wisdom and an output, but also greater than that simple being and becoming of truth, which is required as a level 3 part of caring for truth and the great work, is now in level 4, you have to actually share, speak, and preach the truth. From that courage to become it, the courage also to speak it, and the will to speak it. So you share that truth from that care for truth, and this is part of the great work as well. And that's the end of this infographic, I guess. It works really well when you don't have to explain everything over and over from the beginning. But if you want more information apart from what I've already described, as I've said, I have 2 other infographics that deal with this material specifically in Circle of Life and Causality, Consciousness, Choice, and Trivium, relating to these 6 points. Well, I have like 9 in the other one. That's because I have stimulus, thinking, and response as part of the processes as well. But it's essentially just 6. And I have a final image here. I was just putting triangles and triangles in the 2, and I thought, well, yeah, if you have 3 triangles, that's the Ennead. So I was like, oh, well, I'll make the Ennead. So it's just taking... you could put 8 if you want and make an 8-spoked wheel, or it's just everything that I'm doing is in 3s. So you have thoughts, emotions, and actions. There's grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and also another aspect of the Trivium is knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. So in the previous infographic, in number 14, I had logic, processing, understanding as the same part, and grammar, input, knowledge as the same part. Rhetoric, output, wisdom as the same part, because they are the same parts of the Trivium. So here, it's not really an Ennead, because it's just grammar and knowledge, same parts, but you can see how it flows better. In the Causality, Consciousness, Choice, and Trivium, you can really see how it flows, because I have a 1, 2, 3, and then a 1, 2, 3, and then the 3 1s happen first, and then the 3 2s happen next, and the 3 3s happen afterwards. And it makes sense in the flow. Because you have grammar, and then from that comes knowledge, and you think about it, and then logic and processing it, and then you understand, and then you can have an emotional meaning attributed to it, and then you have your rhetoric output, and your wisdom and your action. But it's all essentially the grammar, knowledge, thought, logic, understanding, emotion, and rhetoric, wisdom, action. Those are the 3 sections. And the middle part, the logic, understanding, and emotion, is what's important in terms of emotion for a valence, salience, giving meaning to it, desire and care. If you're looking at it in terms of emotion, well, that's a central part to it, is what drives us, is the care. And logic and understanding drives us in our understanding. So that's the Ennead of consciousness, just extra little infographic I made. Image number 16 deals with the tree symbolism in a different respect than image number 7. I'm using it now instead of the foundation being in matter in order to ground yourself in reality to evolve consciousness. Now it's reversed. So as other images, number 8 I think, had logic as the foundation and Internal consciousness as the foundation, as the first thing, because yes, that is how we generate in reality. First it starts internally, then we bring it externally. So that's why there's, for us, there's the primacy of consciousness, the power to create change. But the primacy of existence is first. Here I'm just representing the causal force as what's prime for consciousness, as being the root for us as consciousness, as the tree represents the green of the unified whole of ourselves, which is consciousness, self, or soul, and it includes the ego in there, the I, who we are, ego, personality, identity construct, as a positive or a negative, and consciousness as positive imaginations or negative imaginations in pure fantasy, and the true self or the false self. So here I'm trying to represent the tree in different symbolism, as opposed to symbolism I've used before. So again, don't get caught up in rigid, symbolic interpretations. You have to go with the context of what is being demonstrated through the symbolism. So in effect is truth level 1, what is or has manifested in reality, what is existing or has existed, as I've shown in the recent images. And these are actions, effects, events, the constructs, the structures, the living, stimulus and response. This is the visible realm, physical and seen, matter, objective, where particulars are, and this is all measurable. The causes are truth level 2, the way of living in truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law, etc. These are this is consciousness, axioms, the core foundation. That's why I put it in here as the axioms, because we determine axioms and base foundations using our internal aspects of consciousness and using logic. We determine the root causal factors, the axioms, the core foundation, with the logic and the why. The why answers the root causal factor. So again, instead of this is motivation, and as effects had stimulus and response. In the causes we have the drive and purpose. Again, we have care and the axioms. The axioms are the drive and purpose. Care as well as drive and purpose, because axioms, act, action, actual, comes from the root ag, Proto-Indo-European root ag, and the reverse ga is also the root for care, and that's why care and axioms is related to drive and purpose. And comparatively to the effects of the visible realm, the causes are the hidden realm, the quote spiritual and unseen instead of the physical and seen. It's mind instead of matter, subjective instead of objective, universals instead of particulars, and formless instead of the measurable that has form. And the effects, these are the leaves and branches that are the symptoms that manifested the effects, the symptoms, the problems, the results, and the output, etc. Focusing here has no power for real lasting effect of change. The change has already taken place. So when you perform an action, the action's already done. You're not going to worry about your action, what you could have, how you wish you could have done it differently, and all these worrying about the past that's already done and you can't change it. So don't focus there. You need to focus, in order to change things in the future, you need to focus back onto the causal realm, to the root causal factors, to then generate again new effects that are not the same as the previous ones, which were in error. So the only way to correct your previous actions is to go find out why those actions were flawed, and then don't do them again and do something that's not flawed. So the roots are the causal factors, the core foundational axioms for living our life. The manifestation, essence, emanation, and generative source. The power to really change for the better and make it last. So that's where the root symbolism is used in this infographic. as the axioms, and from the thought and emotion, the axioms and the care, they're the manifestation, the essence, the emanation, and the generative source from our thoughts to emotions, and then those together produce our actions. So if we look at the tree, we have inductive logic going from reality. So if you look at infographic 14 and 13, you'll see how we care to learn, and we consume, and we care to teach, and we generate. But we can also look at, well, here it's the same way. So here we can look at, I've also mentioned in those infographics where we induce, I think it was infographic 9 on the Trivium, where we induce reality from the grammar to logic, and then logic to rhetoric. But in between grammar and logic, there's always a process. It's always feeding back. There's a spiral, a logic grammar spiral, induction deduction spiral, particular to universal spiral. So when you're in effects, to get to the causes, you use induction to imagine causes from effects, and then you use deductive logic to verify the causes through the effects in reality. So you keep going around in a circle to verify and enhance your understanding of reality. And people can also view these in terms of the symbolism that I've already mentioned, in heaven, sky, and air, and hell, earth, underworld. So that's why the pseudo-spiritual conceptions, and the new thought, and the new age, and bullshit from the East, all these phantasms of the mind that are taken as reality, well then hell, earth, and underworld, that's the realm of effects. And causes, well that's heaven, sky, and the air, and that's why you have, oh well, the absolute. That's where we're going to create the absolute in our mind as this thing, as the prime cause, and we'll call it God, call it whatever, call it the source, and that's the absolute now. That's what's real. And then what's deduced from that falsely, well, if that's the real and that's absolute over there, well then we're only relative, and we're not real, we're unreal. So it's all an illusion, it's all Maya, which is not the real term, not the real sense of Maya. Maya is about how the world we create as humans, we live in a fictitious world of imagination and illusions. That's the Maya, not the physical world. But people want to get lost in pseudo-spiritual bullshit, and they don't want to, oh my god, no, not going to look at where I am right now as reality. No, I'm going to use my mind and imagine fantasies, and that's the real, that's the absolute. So we're unreal and we're relative. So it's where you get all this bullshit symbolism correspondence where, oh well, now hell, earth is hell in the underworld, and it's run by the devil, and because God is over there somewhere else, and the prime cause, the first mover, and that's heaven in the sky. So now earth is the domain of the devil, and it's the domain of the unreal and the illusion, and devil and the Satan run the world, and it's all falsity, and there's all these bullshit conceptions because of false correspondences, blind correspondences that do not match reality. They're taking the primacy of consciousness, of fantasy imaginations, as the base for understanding reality, and projecting that imagination, the abstraction, onto reality. There's the danger of abstraction. It's very powerful and can help us learn, but if you do it incorrectly and you put too much veracity and too much weight on a simple abstraction, then it overrides the concrete reality that is a reality, an actuality where we live, and then we're only a potentiality, as Aristotle used his terms. Oh well, we're only the potential, and the actual is the absolute over there somewhere else. Was the poison of these abstractions and imagination, which takes us away from objective understanding of reality, and then this reality becomes less real, and the more real is over there somewhere else, but it's only in our mind. But then it becomes real, and more real than where we actually are living right here and now. So it's just ridiculous the problem of human consciousness itself and its ability to invent anything. It's very dangerous. All these beliefs of bullshit. And that's why learning how to think, knowing how to think, and how to find truth is very important. And we're in dire lack of this in our age. It's been in lack in all ages, where we have the opportunity to learn like never before, and people are not doing it. They're remaining ignorant and unable to contemplate and reflect properly. Just believe whatever you want. So the next image, number 17, is the previous image I've done, an infographic on the circle of life. I've just called it the wheel of life. And it's redone from the previous green and red as internal, external. I went back to my original description that I had in the Trinity of Consciousness infographic, the first infographic I ever made. I had my colors right, or internal was blue, external was red, and unity was in green. And then later I was more influenced by Mark Passio's cause and effect infographic, so I changed my internal to green and external to red. And then I had the triangle as blue. But then when I realized that, well, the triangle is the unified part of thoughts, emotions, and actions. That's supposed to be in green. And the internal is supposed to be in blue, and it just makes more sense to have it color-coded that way. There is still an aspect when you're talking about a whole human, and thought, emotion, and action together as a causal force in reality. In that sense, then it's green as a force of will, as a force of self, force of consciousness. That's green producing in the red. But within consciousness itself, we have internal and external aspects. So within ourselves, within the green triangle, there's blue and there's red. But within a causal agent, ourselves, in terms of reality, well, then it'd be green on red, which in the upcoming infographics has that more, that color symbolism used in that way. So I'm not going to go over this infographic. I'm just using it as to show the previous work I've done. This one has been remade, as I said, in color-coded wise. You can look at the previous one in the Circle of Life infographic and video presentation I did. And this is the same information. I just changed the colors. So you can see how the previous infographic that I was describing is based on this one, where I had the leaves and the branches and the roots, and truth level 1, truth level 2, and then on the right the actions and the axioms. And this was my first one where I had combined causality, consciousness, and trivium. So you can look at that, and I'll just mention, I didn't have it in my other ones. So we have from our thoughts to emotions to action, from the grammar to logic to rhetoric. We have a greater capacity for thought, allows us to process and understand our environment and events better. Then logic brings the internal subjective realm into alignment with the objective rhythm of reality to produce harmonious external manifestations. And that's why logic is central at the bottom and the foundation for understanding. And then we have care to create a manifestation will drive us in certain directions and ways of living. And then from the emotions and the care, we get to our response, and the rhetoric, output wisdom. So if you want more of a description on this one, please go look at the previous infographic, Circle of Life, and the video presentation on that. For the final infographic in this little part, this little addendum, 3-part addendum, is again a remade version of the Circle of Life. And this one's causality, consciousness, choice, and trivium. This one just has the 2 additional parts of choice and free will, which is the randomness to create the effect. And then when what has been output is available for input, the effects and events affect us. Well, that's where we don't have a choice. That's natural law, effects coming on us and affecting us. That's determinism. That's where we experience an effect. We don't have a choice to experience effects. They happen all around, and we can't put our heads in the sand and pretend they're not happening. So there's a part of choice and free will, and there's a part of no choice and determinism, where we experience the effect, and the free will choice, where we create an effect. And this one, pretty much very similar to the previous one, although some changes, such as the Trinity is more described inside the green triangle, as opposed to the other one, doesn't have the extra information. And this one's also presented in a recent audio and video, but you can go look up for the infographic Causality, Consciousness, Choice, and Trivium. And in that post, there's the infographic and the audio file, and also the video link to YouTube. So that's it for this presentation. And up next will be the causality prime ratio aspect of causality and how it interlinks, and the aggregate co-creation aspect relating to this individual aspect of ourselves, our own individual consciousness, and how we ourselves interact with reality. I'm going to take it to the more global, interactive of cause and effect for everybody together. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a nice day. Take care. Peace.